Today, we're busting the myth that you have to constantly be productive. Welcome to the Fierce Authenticity Podcast. I'm your hostess, Sharani M. Batak, and I teach you how to have amazing relationships by doing one simple thing: dismantling supremacy culture's internalized oppression and conditioning. Be sure that you've hit subscribe to the podcast and come on over and join me in my private newsletter community, where I have a collection of specially curated tools to get you started. Simply visit www.sharanimbatak.com/connect to get started. Welcome back to the podcast. Now that spring has officially sprung and April is literally happening tomorrow, I think it's a great time for us to talk about productivity and the natural seasons of rest. You see, living in the culture that we do, I know that you have been just as conditioned as I have to believe in this myth that we have to be productive all the time, that we're supposed to constantly be hustling, constantly supposed to be going, constantly supposed to be producing. Well, you and I also both know that when we are constantly producing, take Monsanto, for example, when we are constantly producing and in a state of perpetual harvest, quote unquote, what ends up happening is we yield fruit, we have harvest that's empty and hollow and devoid of all nutrients. And if that's what it does to our food, imagine what it does to us and our work in the world. And you see, this myth that we've been told about the need to be in constant state of productivity, well, that is none other than a part of supremacy culture's conditioning on us. It's a part of the way that for millennia, okay, this one doesn't come from millennia. This one really only comes from toxic capitalism. But we have been taught for centuries that this is the way it needs to be done. Whereas when you look at indigenous wisdom, when you look at the wisdom of those who were the original keepers of the land, you see that they follow cycles. So when you look outside the window, for most of us, you can see if it's winter, if it's summer, if it's spring, it's fall. I know people like to say that California doesn't really have seasons, but that is not true. We actually do have seasons, and I see it in my backyard all the time. When I look outside my window right now, what I see are the peach tree and the nectarine tree starting to bud and have their beautiful pink blossoms. Well, guess what, you guys? A few months ago, when it was the dead of winter, those beautiful blossoms did not exist. They were not there. I looked outside my window, and most of what I saw in my yard was just dry and barren and looked pretty dead, actually. And what I've learned over time is in winter, trees, everything around us really, because even the animals hibernate, but everything goes into this state of deep rest. All of the energy turns inward and is really focused on just hearth and home, really, and being cuddled up and close to our loved ones. I mean, In the wintertime, the days are shorter and the nights are longer and it's cold, and you look outside your window and there's really little happening in terms of life in the natural world. And we often get into this habit of believing that there is something wrong with us if we're not being productive at that time. And I'm not going to lie, I used to fall into that trap all the time. I used to always get down on myself, and it was like, why can't you do anything? Why are you constantly in bed? Why are you feeling so depressed? And lo and behold, as I started learning more and more about natural cycles and the natural seasons and a way of looking towards nature to guide us, I started realizing, oh, yeah, the reason I feel that way is because my body is naturally responding to what is happening outside in our world. When it's dark outside and cold, it's time to cozy up. It's time to wear my jammies, my fuzzy robe. It's time to have my hot tea or hot chocolate on days that I want to indulge. And it's time for me to just sit there and be cuddled under my blankies and be extra cuddled up with my hubby and our puppy. That's what I want to do. I don't want to go out. I don't want to be out there, especially if it's raining. I don't do rain. And I used to beat up on myself for that. And now, because I know better, I don't have to beat myself up for that. And the most interesting thing happened actually, it was around December 2021. I was looking at the numbers for my business in terms of finances. And at that point, I had been in business almost 8 years. Like I had started doing research. December was 8 years since I started doing research. And February was officially when I made my 8-year anniversary for my business. And what I looked at when I was looking at the numbers is I saw this trend. And it literally took almost 8 years for me to really see this trend and accept it instead of trying to reject it, which was that there is a natural ebb in my practice, in my business, from the months of November till about March. And guess what happens? November till about March. It's cold, it's dark, and I don't want to be outside. And then, of course, if you live in an area where holidays are celebrated during that season, there's that as well. And for the first time, I looked at those numbers and I was like, oh, wow, I really fully see the trend here. And I don't have to freak out if January and February aren't as high in income. And that was the first time ever that I actually allowed myself to be present with that, to accept that instead of trying to fight against it. And I'm not going to lie, because I've been conditioned by supremacy and toxic capitalism, my brain did start to freak out every now and again. And thankfully, I had both the awareness that, oh, there's my brain doing what my brain does and is totally trying to hijack things because it's afraid that we're not making enough money or whatever the stories are. So I had that awareness. And then I also had the awareness of all of the evidence that supports, yes, for those winter months, my business income does dip low. And then come spring, it starts to rise again. And March is really when it's like not only is my business starting to pick up, but even my personal energy starts to pick up. And in the past, that was a tool to beat myself up with. It was a tool to oppress myself with. It was another way to get down on myself and tell myself how much I suck, how awful I am, how terrible I am, and all those other things. And this year, I was equipped with both pieces of information. One, being able to spot my brain's freak out, and 2, the evidence that my business income picks up as my energy picks up, as the sun is out more, as the days start to get longer. Because my soft, supple human body, which is a soft, supple animal body, follows the natural rhythm of rest, of turning inward, of preserving my energy during those dark, cold, sometimes rainy winter months. And I'm sharing all of this with you today because it's really important that you know and that you understand that if for the past few months you have felt low energy, or if you have felt a sense of just wanting to cuddle up and be in your fuzzy jammies and all that good stuff, then there's nothing wrong with you. You're human. You're human, and your animal body is simply responding to the natural realm. And now that is not to say that there are not those of you for whom you love the winter season, and that's when you get jazzed and excited and all those good things. But this episode isn't about that. This episode is really about the ways that we beat ourselves up when we get into those phases where we start to feel like we're quote unquote not being productive enough, where we don't have enough energy and we try to force ourselves to have more energy, where we just replicate the same old patterns of oppression internally that we have been taught externally. So, my friend, that is what I want you to know today. I want you to know that the state of constant productivity, the state of perpetual harvest, the state of always going, and not giving yourself the time and space to turn inwards and to rest, that's just another way supremacy culture keeps you oppressed. And now that you know this, you don't have to buy into that lie. You don't have to buy into the lies that tell you that you suck, that you should have more energy, that you should be doing more. Should. All of that shoulding on yourself. Don't do it. And recognize instead what is actually happening. And before we go, I also want to mention that you might be listening to this episode sometime in summer or sometime in fall. And you might be like, how is this relevant? And the way it's relevant is that these seasons that we have in these cycles, they're not just applicable to our external natural world. I mean, today I talked about that for the most part, but it's also applicable to when we are going through a season of high productivity, and then we need to balance that out with a season of rest. And then we have those sparks and seeds of ideas that start to be planted and watered and grow. And so no matter when you're listening to this, and no matter what is happening in your life, this episode serves as a reminder to let you know that no matter what, you don't have to constantly be hustling and producing, and you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to turn inwards. You are allowed to snuggle up and to be in that fuzzy jammies and those fuzzy robes. You are allowed to do abso-freakin-lutely nothing at all. And anything that leads you to believe otherwise, anything that believes you to feel guilty or shameful around your need to rest, those are just the lies and the bullshit that supremacy culture has conditioned you to believe so that you can keep yourself and your loved ones oppressed. And so with that, have a wonderful week, and we will be together again soon. I want to take a moment to honor and acknowledge the amazing support team that helps make this podcast possible for you. Starting with Diego Velazquez, our podcast editor and the talented artist who created our custom music. Ana Olvina, my wonderful assistant who creates all of our beautiful graphics and the transcript of every episode, which you can find over at www.fierceauthenticity.com. Biana Sandich, who writes our amazing show notes and does it so well that I bet you couldn't tell it wasn't me. The talented Jillian at Epoxy Studios, whose photography is our cover art and pretty much every other curated image that you see of me on social media. My husband, who puts up with me when it's 11:30 p.m. on a Sunday night and I'm like, hey babe, I gotta record a podcast episode. Like right now. Is that okay? My higher power, whose divine wisdom flows through me to bring these messages to you. And last but not least, I want to thank you, my listener, so much for listening in. If you'd like to join the podcast support team, some ways you can do so are by rating and reviewing the podcast, sharing it with everyone you know, and, if possible, making a financial contribution through the link in the show notes so that you too can be part of the team elevating this podcast and making it possible to bring to other listeners like you. I'm sending you so much love, and we will be together again soon.